The Construction Association of Michigan, CAM, has been helping commercial and industrial contractors and suppliers grow since 1885. They provide contractors leadership through aggressive lobbying, project reporting, safety and education training, and insurance and banking as Michigan takes first steps toward a safe start. Thank you to the companies that are returning to work with the safe work ethic that defines the construction industry. For information, visit buildwithcam.com. They are one industry, one resource, one CAM.
Today's episode of CAM's Building Michigan podcast is sponsored by Priority Health, endorsed health insurance carrier for CAM members.
So right now, we've all been feeling lots of shifts in our lives. We've gone from crazy busy schedules to way more time with our loved ones, from commuting to the office to working from our couches. And that's okay, because Priority Health is always ready to shift right there with you. So whether you're experiencing a shift in employment or you're prepping for a new member of the family to arrive, Priority Health has you covered. Priorities shift, so maybe it's time your health insurance company did too. Find your plan at PriorityHealth.com.
Hello, and welcome to our second episode of CAM's Building Michigan podcast, produced for Michigan's construction industry by the Construction Association of Michigan, CAM. My name is Kevin Koehler, and I'm the president of CAM and your host for Building Michigan. Our podcast is designed for the construction industry here in the Great Lakes State. Each 20 to 30-minute episode will feature conversations on industry topics, including a variety of conversations with industry leaders, discussing construction projects, trends, business development, workforce, safety, legislation, products, equipment, and other related industry topics. So let's get to it. Season 1, Episode 2. We're really excited to have with us today Jim Baird. Jim is a partner with Plante Moran Financial Advisors and the firm's chief investment officer. He chairs the firm's investment committee as well. Jim specializes in providing an unbiased view of the global economy and capital markets and developing investment strategies to help clients manage risk and meet their long-term goals and objectives. He is widely regarded as an expert on the U.S. economy, capital markets, and issues relevant to investing. He is frequently quoted in the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, CNN Business, MarketWatch, and the Associated Press, and of course our own CAM magazine. Jim, welcome to CAM's Building Michigan podcast.
Kevin, great to see you. And even though it's not in person, great to be back with you again, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with your listeners today.
Well, we really appreciate you taking some time to join us today. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention to our listeners that you will be our keynote speaker at the CAM HBA, the CAM Home Builders Association Mid-Year Economic Forecast, which will be held via Zoom webinar on June 9th at 10 a.m. The event is $25 per person, and you can register by going to www.buildwithcam.com. And I guess my staff tells me there's still some sponsorship opportunities. So for all of you out there listening, feel free to give us a call. Our interview today will just scratch the surface of what the virtual program will cover on the 9th. The virtual program will cover way more in-depth U.S. and Michigan economic outlook, as well as diving deeper into the forecast for commercial and residential construction, and actually feature a Q&A session with Jim and the viewers. We look forward to June 9th and to our time today. So Jim, why don't we get started?
Sounds great. Plenty to talk about in this environment.
Absolutely. So let's start with your thoughts on the overall economy and the effect of the pandemic on the economy, and what is really the broad message right now, and where do you see it headed over the next 18 to 24 months?
Well, Kevin, it's a great question. And, when you reflect back on where we've been over the last year, I don't think, go back 15 months and none of us could have expected the path that we would have gone down. Either from a health perspective or certainly from an economic perspective. Looking back over that time, you think back to just over a year ago, the degree of uncertainty and the whipsaw that we saw in the economy. Weakest quarter, the biggest descent on record in quarter 2 of last year, the strongest rebound that we've ever seen in quarter 3. And then things have kind of leveled off since then. And so the question really becomes, where do we head from here? You mentioned the pandemic, and I do think that overall the news there is relatively good. You're seeing broader distribution of vaccines. You're starting to see parts of the economy reopen. Obviously, we're in a little bit of a unique situation here in Michigan, given the surge that we've seen and the new variant and some of the concerns around that. But I think as we look forward from here, you have to be more optimistic about where we're headed from a health perspective. From an economic perspective, it also looks pretty bright. And so most of the forecasts that we're seeing at this point, whether it comes from the Fed or from private economists, suggest that we're probably shaping up for our strongest year of economic growth that we've seen in the United States, perhaps dating back to the 1980s. So overall, a really strong outlook, predominantly driven by the consumer. There's a very different environment in the household sector for consumers today than we would have seen a couple of years ago. Over the last year, consumers have paid down debt. They've saved a tremendous amount of money. And now you get to the point where the economy starts to reopen, people can start to get out and do more things. What do you think they're going to want to do? They've got the money. They certainly are tired of being cooped up. So we expect that the consumer sector is going to be a huge driver as we move forward from here. And you're seeing that filter through to any number of areas of the economy.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I know that from a residential side, while people were off on the pandemic, I was talking to someone from Sherwin-Williams today, and they said they even had some product shortages, which is extremely rare because so many people are coming in and buying paint to paint their homes and fix their houses up. And I've heard of similar stories, obviously, in a lot of different areas. So, well, it's encouraging to see or to hear that we believe that we're moving forward and we're going to continue to gain some steam here in the next 18 to 20 months, something like that. Just out of curiosity, have you been vaccinated? Maybe that's too personal of a question.
Not at all. I'm happy to say that I have. I got my second vaccination here just over 2 weeks ago, and that makes 4 of the 5 members of my immediate family are at that point. So it feels good. Obviously, we're not out of the woods, but again, it feels like we're making progress.
Yeah, fantastic. I actually 2 weeks ago got my second vaccination as well. I had to drive to Ohio to get it, but I'm glad that I did. And both my wife and daughter have been fully vaccinated. They're both in the medical profession, so they were vaccinated some time ago. So I think we all need to do our part, whatever that may be. So
I completely agree.
Glad to see that you've gotten it. So how do you view Michigan's economy now and in the next 18 to 24 months? And, maybe you can tie the pandemic and how it's affected that and, affected our economy as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kevin, because, when you think back over an extended period of time, Michigan had the reputation of being a weaker economy. And we I can think back over a decade to the single state recession. It was a term that was out there for a while. But what we've really seen is an amazing turnaround here over the last year or so. Again, we're not back to where we were pre-pandemic, but ironically enough, that manufacturing sector, which represents about 20% of the economy in Michigan, being one of the stronger aspects of the economy over the last year, has really benefited the state as well. When you think about where the spending has been, consumers have been spending more over the course of the last few quarters, but it's been very much geared towards the goods sector, not the service sector, because of the restrictions that have remained in place. So that's really helped the economy in Michigan. Today, unemployment here down around 5.1%. Contrast that with the national average, which is almost 1% higher. So we're seeing some really good things here. And as we see, again, slowly the service sector reopening, you're seeing a lot of those jobs coming back now as well. So I think the outlook is pretty positive in that regard. The one almost unfortunate cautionary note that I would strike would be that as we are looking at where some of the risks to the economy lie, you look at rising material costs, you look at disruptions on the supply chain side of things, and you are seeing that start to negatively impact the manufacturing sector. The automobile industry, certainly you're hearing more rumblings around that. And it's not demand. Consumer demand is really good. The question is, can production keep pace to meet that demand? And so I think it's possible you could see things slow down a little bit there in the coming quarters if we're not able to deal with those supply chain imbalances.
Interesting. And as you know, our audience is commercial centric. How do you see the commercial construction sectors now and in the next couple of years? Maybe from a national perspective and more localized from a Michigan perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question. We talked a little bit about the bifurcation in the economy between services and goods, and I think you're seeing a little bit of that in the construction sector as well, between residential and commercial. And again, I think much of that is being driven by some of the lasting effects from the pandemic. So think about what's changed in the last year. How many of us moved from working in an office day to day to working from home? And how many will continue to work from home, even if not 100% of the time, greater flexibility around that. So lots of discussions around what the longer term demand is going to be nationally for office space. You think about the changes in the way in which people are spending. More online commerce and shifting away from bricks and mortar. So I think on the commercial side, there's a lot of questions around that. Based on what we're seeing and hearing, it would appear that 2021 is probably going to be a softer year for the commercial sector nationally than even maybe last year was, because of that lagged effect. You're seeing a decline in architectural billings, you're seeing a decline in new projects. And many projects that might have already been slated were either canceled or perhaps in some cases just pushed back until there was greater clarity around the near-term need. Layer on, again, rising costs, in some cases, labor shortages among the various trades. And I think it creates a little bit of a disruptive atmosphere. So where are the areas where you're seeing greater weakness? Well, as I already mentioned, office is certainly one. Leisure and hospitality, given the severe decline in travel. Again, we expect that to improve over the course of time, but it does have a bit of a lagged effect in terms of new construction, perhaps remodels as well. And then a little bit in the, I'll say, the more discretionary areas of consumer spending. So those are the areas where I think, it's going to take a little while for that to work itself out. Over the longer term, I guess the question becomes what happens with those spaces that are existing. Is there going to be more opportunities to rehab some of those spaces for different purposes that could create some opportunities as well? But I think probably a little bit softer as we look forward from here on the commercial side, particularly relative to the residential side where there's really robust demand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I think the AIA consensus forecast this year for 2021 showed roughly a 5.7% decline. And for 2022, it's showing a 3.1% increase over the 2021 decline. So that kind of mirrors exactly what you're saying. And it's interesting because, CAM owns a 30,000 square foot building here on Woodward Avenue in Bloomfield Hills. And the majority of our staff is working from home because they can. And I wonder, where's that going to lead? What's that going to lead to in the future? I'm hearing from a lot of HR managers, there's going to be some kind of an amalgamation of, or a blending of work from home and work in the office. I, for one, like having people in the office. I like that camaraderie. I like to be able to discuss things. If I want an answer, I like to walk down the hall and we can, have a quick discussion, not have to set up Zoom calls and try to catch somebody on their phone and everything else. So I look forward to the day we're back in the office, and hopefully that comes sooner than later.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And the way that I'm thinking about it is to say, I don't expect we're ever going back to what we were pre-pandemic, because there have been a lot of positives that have come out of this. Frankly, we've learned that we can work remotely and be very effective at doing so. I would have been very much in the skeptical camp about that before. But, when push comes to shove, we tend to be very resourceful and we figure it out and we move forward. And we've successfully done that. But I agree with you. I do miss the camaraderie. I think there are times that just being able to pop into somebody's office and have a 5 or 10 minute discussion can be very efficient, very effective. And, let's face it, living and working the rest of your life in a 12 by 12 beige cube that happens to be part of your house isn't necessarily the ideal environment for many of us.
Yeah, it's in the construction industry, it's a face-to-face business. It's networking, it's a personal relationship type business. So it's really difficult when you can't get out there and shake somebody's hand or negotiate a deal when you're trying to do that, via Zoom, or you're trying to do it over the phone. It's traditionally it's been, a very effective face-to-face business in construction. So I think that a lot of our contractors are looking forward to the day that things do open up. as much as possible. Hey, what do you see as you talked briefly about some headwinds? I think labor shortages are one that has been kicked around in our industry for a couple of years now. But we're starting to hear about, you mentioned the supply chain issues, but material cost increases. Lumber's gone up 18-20% over the last year. It's starting to become a real issue, if it hasn't already.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. You're seeing it on a number of fronts. Lumber, you mentioned, copper, steel in some cases, just a whole range of physical products. And again, I think some of that will ultimately diminish. Some of it is frankly the base year effects. Think back a year ago where prices were plunging for almost everything, with perhaps the notable exceptions being groceries and toilet paper, right? Those were the things everybody was stocking up on. But beyond that, demand really dried up. And so we saw some significant disinflationary pressures. Now, a year later, you're seeing the other end of that. So not only are you seeing demand return, but in some cases, pent-up demand pushing it higher. And it's not just here in the United States. It's more of a global issue as well. So that, coupled with the ongoing disruptions that you're seeing, you hear about the container ships parked out in California that they just can't get unloaded. Some of the other disruptions, some of those things are temporary. And so I think we'll get past that and we should see those inflation pressures calm down a bit. But some of it really is a function of changing demand. And, we alluded to it a little bit already, but on the residential side, you look at the data and activity is higher than it was a year ago. You're seeing more and more people moving out of urban areas and into suburban areas, out of multifamily into single family. And a lot of them are first-time buyers. So with interest rates still relatively low and the changing lifestyles that we're seeing with more people spending time at home, they want a little bit more space. They want to invest in that space. That could keep demand there strong for some period of time. And that will, that would be, I'd say, one of the primary forces that could keep prices moving higher. Mm-hmm. Good if you're a homeowner, a little more difficult if you're a potential buyer.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads us into my next question, and that's the effects that the new administration will have with their proposed infrastructure plan. Or I guess as they're calling it, the American Jobs Plan. What do you see as the effects on the construction industry specifically?
Well, I'll preface it by saying, put me in the category of I'll believe we get it when we see it. Infrastructure has been something that seemingly has had, at least in terms of rhetoric, strong bipartisan support for some period of time, but it never quite seems to get over the hump. Now, I do think there's a better chance of it at this point than there has been at times in the past, but it does still have an uphill battle. So, think about how closely divided the Senate is. They've got to keep, the Democrat contingent there together in order to get it through. The Republicans are going to be very much focused on how do you pay for this? And is the infrastructure package that's been put on the table all infrastructure, or are there a lot of other things in there that you can debate whether or not they're valuable investments, but they really aren't traditional infrastructure. So now the Republicans are coming back with a much more curtailed bill in terms of size, maybe a little more focused. If we see that get to fruition, though, I don't think there's any question that it is a positive for the industry. Much of it will hinge on where those dollars are designated, though. You've certainly got a portion of it that would appear to be earmarked for traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, those types of things. And then you've got the portions that might be earmarked for, maybe you want to call it next generation infrastructure, whether it's clean energy, broadband access in rural areas, electric vehicle infrastructure, a lot of these other types of things. And so I think to a large degree, it's going to depend on how big of a package ultimately gets through. Are they able to get something through, and what is the composition? And until then, I think the future there's just really uncertain in terms of what the impact would possibly be.
Yeah, I did see that the Republicans came out with as you mentioned, a much smaller plan. I think it was 500 or 600, I think it was $1 million just strictly to infrastructure. I could have that wrong. It may be higher than that, but there will be some back and forth. And I do think that there's a real opportunity to get something pushed through for the first time in a long time. And I think we can all agree that we need some major infrastructure improvement here, not only in Michigan, but in the entire country.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more on that. And I don't think there's any question that the need is there. It's really about making sure that whatever bill they get through, if they can get something done, that it's targeted towards the right things. Because I don't think there's any doubt there's a need. And I would say that even though we've seen interest rates start to creep higher, it's still a pretty good time, arguably, for the federal government to borrow to make those investments. We've shown over the last year spending over $5 trillion on a variety of relief packages, most of which was aimed at consumer sector, businesses, et cetera. Really nothing there for infrastructure to speak of. We've proven an ability and willingness to spend. So this would be a great time to try to take that step and get some meaningful investments done.
Absolutely. This is not one of the questions we had discussed, but as far as the PPP goes, in the second round, are you advising any of your construction clients to take advantage of it if they need it?
I will tell you point blank, I have not had any discussions with anybody around that specifically. I think the important thing around the PPP provisions, though, is number one, to understand what you can do with it and what you can't do with it, and make sure that if you're going to tap that you're in a good position, hopefully, to take advantage of it and to benefit from it. So I just say, be careful from that respect, or in that respect. But a lot of businesses have found it to be an effective way to kind of bridge some of that gap as they continue to deal.
I know a lot of our contractors took advantage because we had many, including people from Plante Moran, some of your tax advisors on as well for some programming. But we had many contractors take advantage of that first round, and I think there's a good majority of them looking into the second round. We at CAM took advantage of the first round, and we're also pursuing the second round now. So, but there are some stringent guidelines on how it can be spent, and it's important for all of our listeners to know, and I think they probably do, but they've got to spend it the right way, or it won't be fully recoverable. So
that's right.
Yeah. Do you see any other legislation that could affect our industry coming down the pike, either locally or nationally, that you're tracking?
I think anything else at this point, it may not be let me put it this way. The things I'd be focused on predominantly might not be as specifically focused on construction, but I think one of the things we have to look at is the proposed corporate tax increases that are on the table. How might that impact, capital expenditure budgets? Still a lot of questions around what form that might take or what the magnitude could be. So I think that's something to watch, broadly in terms of the impact on corporate America, and certainly would have an impact on construction budgets. And then I think the other aspect that I would put out there from a risk perspective is re-regulation, right? We came through the last administration where the focus was really on deregulation. And I think clearly you're seeing plenty of indications that it will be pushing back the other direction as we move forward from here. So what could the impact be? Again, in some cases that may create opportunities depending on what form that takes. But it's something that I think we'll be developing as we move forward.
Absolutely. Well, obviously we don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. We do hope that we're trying to, we're getting ahead of it, and pretty soon it'll be in our rearview mirror completely. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like, maybe that I didn't cover in this brief interview, Jim, that you'd like to say to the construction world out there?
I think some of it would come back to the same message I would have for anybody at this point, which is we have come through an awful lot in the last year. And I think sitting here a year ago, if we had looked forward, it would have been hard to envision that we'd be in the position we're in today. I think the fear and the concern was that it could have been a lot worse. The fact that the federal government did step in and provide significant stimulus, provide a bridge for many households and businesses, I think was very, very substantial. Certainly, as you already referenced, the PPP program alone was very impactful in terms of taking a job situation that was difficult, but keeping it from becoming even worse potentially. The monetary stimulus from the Federal Reserve, keeping interest rates low and likely to remain low as we move forward from here for some period of time. So the outlook for the economy, I think, is really quite strong. That's not to suggest there's not going to be some bumps on the road. I think we could see inflation pressures continue to push higher as the year progresses. We're still going to be dealing with some of these, labor shortages in certain parts of the country or certain industries. But I think as we look forward, it is a better outlook. If we can put the pandemic behind us and move forward from here, there's a lot to be encouraged about. And certainly in the construction industry, as we already discussed, 2021 probably not going to be a great year, particularly on the commercial side. I do think that there's some strong, sustained opportunities on the residential side, and I do think that the commercial side will recover as we get through this period of adjustment.
I agree. I think there is going to be some pent-up demand for the commercial side of the house, and look forward to that. Well, Jim, on behalf of all of us at CAM, thank you for being with us today for our Building Michigan podcast, and we look forward to your full forecast at the CAM HBA Mid-Year Economic Zoom webinar on Wednesday, June 9th at 10 a.m. Registration and sponsorship information is available on the CAM website at www.buildwithcam.com. Jim, thank you again for being our guest.
Kevin, thank you. As always, it's a pleasure. Looking forward to the event.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Building Michigan, the official podcast of the Construction Association of Michigan, hosted by Kevin Koehler, CAM President. We appreciate you spending a part of your day with us. If you have a second, please share our podcast with industry colleagues, leave us a review, and connect with us at www.buildwithcam.com. That's all for now. Be sure to subscribe to Building Michigan wherever you get your podcasts and join us for the next episode.
Today's episode of CAM's Building Michigan podcast is sponsored by Priority Health, endorsed health insurance carrier for CAM members.
So right now, we've all been feeling lots of shifts in our lives. We've gone from crazy busy schedules to way more time with our loved ones, from commuting to the office to working from our couches. And that's okay, because Priority Health is always ready to shift right there with you. So whether you're experiencing a shift in employment or you're prepping for a new member of the family to arrive, Priority Health has you covered. Priorities shift, so maybe it's time your health insurance company did too. Find your plan at PriorityHealth.com.
The Construction Association of Michigan, CAM, has been helping commercial and industrial contractors and suppliers grow since 1885. They provide contractors leadership through aggressive lobbying, construction project reporting, safety and education training, industry promotion, insurance, and banking. Are you an owner, developer, or buyer of construction services? Hire a CAM member to get your project done on time and under budget. They are one industry, one resource, one CAM. Check them out at buildwithcam.com.